All right, everybody. It is I, Cory from Wodify, and we are back with another episode of The Next Rep. Tyler, I learned that I can't say the next episode of The Next Rep because that doesn't quite roll off the tongue the same, but I'm pleased to be joined by Tyler Quinn, the founder of Alchemy 365. So, Tyler, thank you so much for joining us here. We really appreciate your time.
You got it. Glad to be here, Cory.
Well, Tyler, you and I have met in person a couple times, and let me kind of paint the picture here for the folks, but I wanted to start here because you and I had a really interesting conversation at Business for Unicorns, the meetup in Denver there. And shout out Mark Fisher, previous podcast guest, who was putting on the seminar. But we also recently talked to Chris Cooper here from Two Brain, and we read the State of the Industry report that they release every year. And one of the things that was really interesting to me is how clearly they laid out the different models that boutique fitness gyms can follow and the discrepancy between a big group model and the small group model and just how different those two things are. What you and I talked about is that Alchemy follows a big group model. And one of the things you talked about is what are the qualities that you look for in a coach? And you were a little bit different from convention in that regard. So without spoiling the end, I'd just like to kind of riff on that a little bit. Tell me about the kind of qualities that you look for a big group model coaching style for the Alchemy classes that you offer.
Where do we begin here? Okay. Let me start by just simply answering the question. What I'm looking for in a great big group model coach, in particular at a place like Alchemy, is I'm looking for a lot of charisma. I'm looking for capacity for critical thinking, thinking on their feet when it comes to human interactions. Right? I'm just looking for people who can talk to other people really well. My belief, and this is a belief that I've developed over at this point 17 years, right? Starting in CrossFit, then moving to Alchemy, and then doing some other things in the business world. My belief is that we should be hiring for values, for the types of people, the personality profiles that best fit the culture of the organization that you're working in, and then train those people for competency. So look, that's the short answer, and a little context behind that, because obviously this was something that stuck out in our conversation a few months ago. The context is that I can look back on my CrossFit business. We had a handful of CrossFit gyms in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and I know we had a staff of very competent coaches with a lot of incredible experience and a ton of certifications under their belt, and people who were competitive and people who were knowledgeable, and they were doing it in their own bodies and they were articulating it to other people. And I was getting, you constantly get complaints that the coaching quality isn't good enough. And no matter how much work goes into coaches, I find that feedback is still prevalent for a lot of operators inside the fitness space. It feels like a mountain you can never get to the top of, no matter what you do. And it just kind of raised the question, kind of like, what is the definition of good? And, in my space, the big group model, when I zoom out and I think about the service and the experience that we're really selling to our customers, technical mastery and technical coaching is really only a portion, arguably like a small fraction of the service that we're really selling. And I think that in big group models, when somebody says the coaches are either good or not good, I think if you really drill down on that, they're really saying, I like them or I don't like them. We can go deeper on that, but at a high level, I have kind of come to the conclusion that becomes the essence of the qualities that I'm looking for in the coaches staff. How much, most people, most of the time, under most circumstances, are they liked? Are they entertaining? Are they fun to be around? We can't let them damage athletes. We can't let them injure people. We can't let them do stupid things. They must have fundamentals. They must have basics. They must know some nomenclature. But to the extent that we are trying to bring in and attract true, sport performance, Olympic caliber, exercise physiologist type people in the room, I'm not even going to make the claim that that's the world that we live in or that's the product that I'm peddling. And so I have a little bit of a cynical view on this, which is like, I'm hiring for values. I'm hiring for like, are you a great person? Do I want to be around you? Will our customers want to be around you? If the answer is yes, I'll train you up. We'll polish you until you can talk the talk enough to be effective as a fitness coach inside of a big group model. Is that appropriate for, the 1-on-2, 1-on-3, 1-on-4 model? Maybe not, probably not. But for what we do, I think that works. And it also, there are a lot more people like that than there are folks you can attract who have, all the education and all the experience and all the years under their belt of being in the classroom, so to speak, teaching people. So that's a long-winded answer. I'm babbling now, but hopefully you can read between the lines and what I'm getting at.
No, I love it. We like to lead with we got him on a hook, Tyler. We gave him the value up front. We gave him the content, the hard-hitting stuff. But now let's talk about how you got there. So, you've told the story of Alchemy and some other appearances that you've done, but just kind of like a brief catch up to speed now that we kind of, understand what it is that you guys are offering and maybe some ways that you tried to differentiate yourself. You started off in the CrossFit space. You ended up founding this new venture called Alchemy 365. Tell us just about that, in a nutshell, kind of what brought you to where you are today.
Sure. So I found CrossFit in 2005. I was a college athlete, and I had a buddy who introduced me. This was back when it was really just a website. I believe there were a couple, I don't think they were called affiliates at the time, but there were a couple, CrossFit boxes, and they were all on the West Coast. Maybe one out east at that point. But it was mostly a website. It was a blog, right? It was just post your scores and
workout of the day.
Go back to work the next day, right?
Yep.
Like many people at that time, I was pretty hooked on it. I was pretty excited about what was going on. And in my senior year of college, in an effort to graduate on time, I had to do an academic internship, some kind of internship. And I broke away from my English and political science studies. And what I was doing was I was just refreshing CrossFit main site, CrossFit.com, all night long. Because this was at a time when they didn't actually post the workout consistently at the same time. You didn't know when it was going up. And I made sure I had copy and pasted this little introduction to who I was, and I just kept being the first comment, which was always a point of pride for me. It was always cool to be first comment. And I tried to be first comment for as many days in a row as I needed to be, talking about how I was looking to do an internship with some box out there in the world, probably on the West Coast. I had a guy named Jeremy Jones, and he had Diablo CrossFit in Walnut Creek, California. And Jeremy invited me out. And so I drove out to California. I did an internship, and I worked at a handful of different boxes out there. And in my sort of exit interview, so to speak, I was granted by Greg Glassman. It was an unbelievably generous gesture, more than a gesture. He basically said, I want you to go back to Minneapolis and launch a CrossFit gym. And I'll get out of the way and I'll just let you go do it. And I think the last thing he said in the email was, I know you're going to hit it out of the park, but don't let me down. That's what I did. So I went back and I started CrossFit Minneapolis, which was the first CrossFit gym in Minneapolis in 2009. I was just out of college, and really it was an if you build it, they will come kind of time in the CrossFit world, where I didn't have I think I slapped a website up. I found a 2,000 square foot little warehouse space up in Northeast Minneapolis, and opened my doors and started calling my friends and saying, do you want to come in and work out? And it was one of those things that grew sort of in spite of my lack of experience and my lack of knowledge. It did grow. Membership did evolve. I was upside down and inside out in terms of operating a real business, but it grew because I think CrossFit was growing, and because I think I was effective in the classroom. I was effective at getting people fired up and making it fun and just, getting after it with people. A very quick aside.
Yeah.
I didn't run into, Greg Glassman showed up at regionals several years later. I had an athlete, I was coaching an athlete named Deborah Cordner-Carson, who was a 3-time games athlete. And she had just finished her last event. She had just made it for the second time. She was going back to California, going back to Carson to compete out there. And Glassman walked in, and of course, everywhere he goes in the CrossFit world, there's like a herd of people. And I went down. I just had to talk to him. I waited in line for like an hour. He had a gift of making people feel like they were the only person in the room. So he would talk to people, and you just waited your turn. And I finally got to talk to him, and I told him the whole story about, hey, you were the one who told me to go back and start this gym, and you waived my fees, and And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, I love this story. I have absolutely no recollection of it, which was like, I actually really loved it. I'm saying that like it was an endearing moment, and it was kind of beautiful that it was such a big thing for me, and he just wanted to see CrossFit grow and evolve. And it was so pure. It was such a pure moment.
But it worked, right?
It
like
worked.
even though it wasn't, necessarily a hallmark memory for him, the fact that it was for you empowered everything else that followed down the chain.
That's what I told him. I said, I've got 4 gyms. We've got, so many members, and this athlete of mine is going to the games, and like, you did that for me. You laid that out in front of me. You just put that in my lap, and I'm so grateful to you. And it was just such a, I don't know. It was. I hope it's coming across that it was funny. It was amazing. It was great, not a bad thing. It was a great thing. At any rate, I'll get going here. Over the years, we were experimenting in the CrossFit gyms. I had 4 CrossFit gyms after a little while. I had CrossFit Minneapolis and St. Paul and St. Louis Park and Minneapolis Northeast, and we were playing with a new concept. It was really just sort of a boot camp style concept. We were like, how can we attract a broader customer base? How can we retain folks who are leaving for some common reasons? Hey, look, I don't want to compete in my exercising. I don't really want to dive in super deep to the Olympic lifts. I mean, there are people who get 4 hours a week to exercise, and they'd come in and I'd tell them, I'd be all excited. I'd say, it's heavy snatch day. Snatches, 8x1. And they're like, it's just not what I'm looking for. Now, I didn't get that at the time as a 24-year-old who was really kind of like super in it. But gradually, I started to hear that feedback and internalize that feedback. And so the idea was, how can we bring in the ethos, the philosophy, the methodology, constantly varied functional movement, high intensity, but maybe discard certain elements that were slightly less attractive to people. Something like the competition, even something like going from as fast as possible in many workouts to as many rounds as possible, making that the sort of the bread and butter, so that there was an element of starting and finishing the workout together no matter what. And we were also paying close attention to core power yoga at that time. My partner and I, core power was blowing up. We were doing something right. We were trying to what's the juice over there? And so we started to say, well, what if we brought a little bit of yoga flow into our warm-ups, and we put it all into one sort of class format? And how would that feel? How would that look? And as an English major, what I did was I actually went back and I sat down and I wrote a fictional review, which I still have.
That's awesome.
From the point of view of a woman who had just taken her first class with this new concept, and her words describing everything about the class. And that became really our most popular class format at our CrossFit gym. I would be coaching a 12-person CrossFit class at 5:30 p.m. And then at 6:30 p.m., and I'm not kidding, 60 people would show up.
Yeah.
And it was
What were you calling the classes at that time?
We were calling the classes Power 20 and Power 10.
Okay.
And the reason we were calling that is because we wanted the class to follow what was effectively a bell curve, a little bit of a intensity, speed, vibe bell curve. Even the music and the pace of the warm-up, it was going to do this bell curve thing. And it reminded me of I was a road crew in high school. And for those who rode, you know what a Power 20 is. You're in the middle of a race. The boat is starting to slow down or wiggle, and your things are falling apart. And the cocks will call for a Power 20, where the stroke seat will dig in, the stroke rating goes up, the power goes up. There's 20 hard strokes to kind of put you back into the race. And so we were the idea was that the class was going to peak with this 20-minute AMRAP, Power 20, and then we were going to wind down with some cool down and restoration and get people stretched out. And when the class started getting really popular, I think the idea was, well, maybe there's a standalone business here. And the rest is history. But initially, we kept our CrossFit gyms and launched Alchemy North Loop in 2015. And after a little while, Alchemy was kind of going gangbusters, and we ended up selling. My partner and I sold our CrossFit business to some coaches, so they're still running and operating super successfully back there, which is amazing. I'm still in touch with the owners. And we went off on a new frontier with a goal of scaling up a little bit bigger, a little bit faster, a little bit higher polish than what we had done with our CrossFit business.
I love that. So the added sort of afterthought, but the secondary offering eventually became the primary offering. They came for CrossFit. They stayed for this new concept that you had created.
Yeah. And I think it was a little bit of like you're sneaking, it's like you're sneaking broccoli into your kid's mac and cheese, right? It's like they didn't realize they were really still doing CrossFit. But we had just manipulated the recipe enough that it was more mac and cheese than it was broccoli. And that became a theme to a lot of what we were doing. Like I started, just honestly, like I started to allow things like crunches into our programming, which we would not have done in a CrossFit workout. But it was like, I'm going to give you crunches, but you're going to give me pull-ups, right? Like I'm going to give you grounded jump and touch for like a little aerobic hit that isn't running and isn't rowing, but you're going to give me burpees and box jumps, right? And that became the way to just gradually bring this new customer profile along for the ride. So, and as a result, Alchemy has evolved. Our programming philosophy has evolved over the years. But that's where it started. That's the storyline that got us from CrossFit to Alchemy, and now here we are 11 years later.
I think that's what's a little bit different. I mean, this is a business requirement that's been around since the dawn of capitalism. But beyond that, like it's never been more difficult in our modern environment to stand out. That's so difficult. Like you used to be able to build a business just based on location or just based on, agreements maybe with a local, we scratch your back, you scratch ours type of agreements with local businesses and networking. But you really, truly do have to, like the competition in all phases, in all spaces of our market has never been denser. So to really stand out is now the challenge. And one of the ways that Alchemy stands out, I have been to Alchemy, is the equipment that you use, namely the Torpedos. And tell me a little bit about how you came up with the idea for these Torpedos, about how you started integrating them into the gym, sort of the thought process. Because one of the first things you think about when you walk into Alchemy is, oh, they're the kettlebells. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Those aren't kettlebells.
Those are weird-looking kettlebells.
Right. Tell me about the dawn of the Torpedo. How did that come into, what you guys offer?
Well, when we were teeing up the first location, there was a lot of conversation about how we were, what we were going to borrow from our existing business and what we were going to do differently and how we would differentiate our concept. And again, one of the things we were trying to tap into was how do we keep functionality? How do we keep intensity? How do we get rid of things that are intimidating, hard on the body? How do we find that middle ground? And listen, I want to just call out my partner at the time, Mike Jones, because Mike was really the guy who believed in the Torpedo and this idea that he was going to like invent a new piece of equipment. Now I was certainly I was the seagull, right? The seagull flies in, shits all over, everything flies away, right? Like I was the seagull for his innovating experience, but I do want to give him credit because I can't own that. But he started to play with designs, and actually, if anybody's interested, we put together a Kickstarter video on the Torpedo that, frankly, the video is better than the Torpedo itself. I think that's like the highlight of my entrepreneurial career. But it tells a little bit of the story, and you see like the first iteration of the Torpedo was concrete PVCs, 2x4s, and I'm not kidding. We built something that was like 4 feet long and you couldn't pick it up, but it gave you a sense of shape and like how it was going to work and how big did it need to be if you wanted to have, and I should stop it here and say a Torpedo is effectively a dumbbell with handles on the outside. And so you can hold it on the outer handles and do barbell-like movements. You can swing it like a kettlebell. You can hold the center handle like a dumbbell. The Torpedo does not feel like a kettlebell. It does not feel like a barbell. It doesn't feel exactly like that to people who have experience with those tools. But for folks that we were drawing in who had not done a lot of weightlifting, it was this sort of manageable piece of equipment that allowed them to do something that kind of looked like a push press. It allowed them to kind of do a swing and kind of let them do some dumbbell-like work, but it wasn't so unwieldy as a barbell. And it obviously, and then sort of the biggest thing was that it allowed us to get 30 people in a classroom. So where we went from 10 people in a classroom, and that was a full room with our full CrossFit box, all of a sudden I could be in a 1,500 square foot space, park everybody in their spot, give them one Torpedo, one slam ball in one box, and really run them through an awful lot of training without it being too sardine-like. So at any rate, the Torpedo took off and ended up, we didn't open our North Loop location with Torpedoes. We did kettlebells and dumbbells in the first location. Then we took a risk and we manufactured our first batch, and we brought them in for our second location at Northeast just to test it. And they were well received, and we replaced North Loop and never looked back. And so now we are a Torpedo only business with a handful of other tools, but that becomes the primary weightlifting implement in our business.
Yeah, it's really is. I mean, I didn't get to take class when I was there, but I did just mess around with the Torpedo after class, and it's an interesting implement. It really is. It's I would dare say that if someone is brand new to training, and as you said, if they haven't had experience with those other implements, I think it's a great way to get them started with resistance training.
Yeah.
I think it's a really effective tool for that. Even something like a goblet squat, it's quite literally the perfect implement for something like that.
Yeah.
It gives them a little bit of stability. You can get the resistance up. It's pretty easy for them to have a nice neutral spine as they're moving through these movements. So it's a pretty interesting implement. If folks haven't seen it, they should definitely check it out. And what was the goal with that business? Like, is Torpedo something you still dedicate time to in terms of like expanding its reach? Like, did you create an entity from that?
Yeah, and you're kind of barking up an interesting tree here, because look, at the end of the day, Alchemy didn't go the distance. We got up to 9 locations in 2 different markets, which I'm happy about. We're a 2-location business now in 1 market, and that was by design. That was intentional. We decided to downsize after a tough few years post-pandemic, and a lot happened in our industry. But one of the great lessons that I've learned over the years, and arguably have a little like PTSD from it, I'm almost too gun shy now as a business owner, is we did too many things. We thought because we were having success early in our brick and mortar boutique fitness business that we could do anything successfully. And that includes smoothie bars. We opened up a food and beverage concept inside of our business. We were doing like very specialized retail and merchandise. I'm talking like Alchemy branded longboards and special tote bags. And we were doing Alchemy retreats. We were literally sending our employees and our customers to Iceland for marathons, to Kilimanjaro to climb Kilimanjaro. We were doing that, and we became an equipment manufacturer, and we started wholesaling Torpedoes to gyms, hotels, basically gyms, hotels, and direct to consumer all over the world, which all sounds great, and to an extent we were successful, and it's who knows what would have happened if 2020 hadn't gone down the way it did. But I do look back and say, we didn't really have our model fully ironed out at that time. We were probably spreading ourselves a little too thin. And I think we would have been a better business if we had just focused on the thing we felt we could be the best at, which at that time was running these like really innovative group fitness experiences for people. But at the time, the goal was, let's build that business too. Let's build all these businesses all under one brand, Alchemy 365, and this brand position of pursue your legend and help people live bigger, fuller, more adventurous lives. And that's why we were able to kind of justify a lot of that stuff at the time.
Yeah, I can understand that when you have such a resounding success with that primary movement, one can feel like they have the Midas touch for a little while, where it's, everything we're doing is going to turn up roses. And I think what's interesting too, you had mentioned that Alchemy grew to 9 locations and then made the decision to really focus on the biggest 2 rather than continue to pursue scale at any cost. Yeah. And what was it like to realize, because I imagine when you got into the business, scale was the top thing on your mind. It was scale, growth. The story of every entrepreneur, right? Mm-hmm. what was it like to get to the mental model where you're like, maybe scale isn't the be all end all? Do you remember when that happened? Was it more of like a Pareto principle? You're like, I'm going to 80-20 this. What was the thought process like?
I mean, maybe a little of that. It was a little bit of like pragmatism. But look, so there's a lot here. Pre-pandemic, there were some corporate owned concepts that were reaching scale. We were a corporate owned. We were not franchising our business. We wanted to own each of them. So that's an element which I'll touch on in just a minute about post-pandemic, how things changed. Pre-pandemic, the real estate selection for businesses like Alchemy was really, we were chasing concepts like Barry's and these really like Main and big locations and like very expensive build outs. Like our last location that we opened prior to the pandemic, which of course we opened a couple months before 2020, I think it was like $800,000 to get that thing off the ground. I mean, it was like, it was very expensive. And that wasn't just dumb decision making, right? That was what was happening at that time. That's what a lot of private equity advisors were telling us we ought to be doing. We were chasing a unit economics sort of balance sheet, like we wanted our P&Ls at each studio to be at a certain point, and so we were doing things that felt appropriate in 2015 to 2019 and three quarters. Post-pandemic, the industry really changed. Number one, people learned to work out by themselves.
Right.
So it's part of the reason you're seeing big box have this major resurgence. Big box was not thriving. People didn't know. I used to joke that they were the zombie gyms. If you could see the camera at a big box gym, like people would walk around like zombies. They'd touch a piece of equipment and they'd walk off to the next one. They didn't know what to do. But everyone got an online coach. Everybody got an online program because they know their option. And so everyone learned to work out on their own. Franchising became the model, which perhaps we will touch on. I have a sort of little bit of a love-hate thing in mindset on franchising of what it's doing to the industry. But so franchising becomes the model. You get all these players who can like very rapidly inject units out into these marketplaces. The pandemic kind of decimated my operating team. We just, like many businesses, we stripped everything back, and you start to, in fitness, it wasn't a light switch. It wasn't like, okay, you're back to normal. It was like you're closed for a year, and now you can kind of reopen, but sort of we're going to like drag our feet for a year.
Right.
And then you're dealing with a whole customer profile where like 50% of them think you should be, and I'm not sharing my point of view on this. I'm just saying 50% think we should be in masks and 20 feet away from each other and nobody should touch anything. 50% say like, buck the man. If you're going to make me wear a mask, I'm canceling tomorrow. It was like this impossible situation. So when you ask me, where did we kind of have the breakthrough moment? I think it was like, we were just kind of struggling to get it back to what it had been. The combination of our real estate profile being very expensive, our team being somewhat decimated, and now we're having a hard time like rebuilding our team and getting the magic back. The customer being attracted to different things, and then this massive flood of franchise concepts into the market. It was just a little bit of a perfect storm. And I'm 11 years older. I was 28 when we started Alchemy. The idea of flying around to cool cities and launching studios and training coaches and doing all that stuff sounded really good at 28. I'm 39. My wife's pregnant with twins. Like, where's my interest? Where's my battery? What do I want my life to look like became a bigger question than like, how do I scale this thing up and make as much money as possible? And like, I just like my interests changed. So combination of all of those factors kind of bring us to the late 2024 when we were just like, look, let's cut this thing down to our two highest performing business units. Yes, it's going to hurt a lot of people. It's going to hurt us. It was a very painful process of just making the decision, of communicating the decision, of doing the actual shutdown, and then kind of reinventing ourselves. But I think it was the right play, and I think it, I don't really regret it. I just think sometimes you win and sometimes you don't win, and that's just kind of life. So here we are.
Right. I think that's a great way to put it too. It's not, it's not necessarily a loss because you still have two gyms with hundreds of members at each location. It's not like, the business is still going very strong, but it just seemed like, unfortunately, just like you said, this unpredictable bag of circumstances was laid at your doorstep, and then someone lit it on fire.
Yeah.
So you have to respond to those circumstances as they arise. And I imagine if I asked you, would you have done anything differently? The answer would be no, because it would necessitate that you would have had to understand that flaming bag of shit circumstances was going to arrive at your doorstep, and who possibly could have imagined that?
It's funny. You're right. I shouldn't say win and not win. I mean, I'm incredibly proud of Alchemy, and our brand matters to a lot of people. I think the social impact, we was just talking to a coach about this, the social impact that we've had in both Minneapolis and in Denver in terms of like the amount of friend groups and marriages and like that have formed in our spaces, and the amount of people whose lives I think we've really improved and touched in a positive way is big, and we are still going on 11 years later. We're coming up on our 12th year, and there's something to be said for that. I honestly, surviving the pandemic with 9 locations spread out, we were on a shoestring budget at that point. We were really creative, and we were really nimble and flexible, and we did things quickly, and I think we communicated incredibly well with our members and our staff. And I feel like even though in the end it was a downsizing of the business, it's not me. I mean, the Alchemy team had a lot of guts to kind of pin the ears back and fucking just get through that period of time. So you're right. I am. There are a lot of wins. There are wins buried in the losses, I guess you could say.
Absolutely. What was that? I once read a book. I think it was Conor McGregor's coach really taking advantage of the peak popularity, 15 minutes of fame they all had. But I think the name of it was either Win or You Learn.
Yeah. Okay.
And there you go. I think it applies here.
In a nutshell. Yeah. You just took my 20-minute answer and you just summed it up nicely.
I have the easy job. You have the hard job. Tyler, I'm interested we kind of beat around this bush a little bit, but I want to talk about the future of the fitness industry a little bit as you see it. Because, you've been in that absolute thick of it, trying to scale a fitness business. At the time, it was the hardest possible time probably in American history to scale a fitness business, at least since it's been an industry. And now you've also gotten at a point where obviously Alchemy still takes up, I'm sure, a lot of your bandwidth, but perhaps have had time to step back a little bit. And you also do some coaching, which we'll talk about in just a second. But you had mentioned that the consumer interest changed a little bit. Where do you think their eye is now? Like, if I were to say the next 5 years, where do you think that that was the eye of Sauron, right? And it used to be looking at whatever, CrossFit, group models, these types of things. Where's the eye of Sauron looking now? Where did that consumer interest go?
My short answer is I don't know. You had Chris Cooper on. I also read his State of the Industry report, which was terrific and incredible and insightful. And shout out to the Two Brain team for putting that out, because that stuff's gold. And I think if anything, I've candidly, I've sort of lost a little confidence in terms of what I totally knew to be true 10 years ago. I knew what I was going to do in the world, because I knew it was the right way to go in the fitness industry. And I don't know if I have that same confidence. I mean, look, there's a clear movement towards strength training, which I think you're seeing a lot of concepts sort of embrace and try to figure out how to put in front of people. Community and this concept of third space and gathering and put the togetherness element is obviously pretty powerful right now. There's a lot of talk about that. I'm a pretty cynical guy though about certain things, and with the amount of for example, I would say I don't know if we're as a community, as a society, we're really all that much healthier, even though access to data and access to training and access to online coaching, it's all through the roof. Access has never been better, and yet we're not getting better. We're not any more together. Our mental health isn't better. We're kind of just trending in the wrong direction. And I think that, and this comes back to something that I talk to my team a lot about, never underestimate the lengths a lot of people will go to really not work hard but convince themselves that they are working hard. And I don't know where it's going, but I sure hope that at the end of the day, the industry pulls itself back into, I don't know, real stuff. Like the recipe for getting strong and the recipe for increasing cardiovascular conditioning and increasing your flexibility hasn't really changed. And it's not going to, because it's kind of like just biology and chemistry, and it hasn't really changed. And so I don't know, I get a little frustrated with what feels like, I guess, just a lot of gimmicky stuff going on out in the industry, and gimmicky stuff which I think is tapping into that mindset of, I want to convince myself I'm doing the work, but I'd rather not do the work. And, I don't know. And maybe, look, Alchemy might be part of the problem. I'm not even going to say that we're some kind of purist, perfect training program, but I do think that we have maintained a point of view that says our workouts are going to be functional. They are going to translate to outside the gym. They are rooted in the basics. You're going to squat, you're going to press, you're going to pick things up off the ground, you're going to do the burpees, you're going to do all that stuff. You're going to do it with intensity. And I just hope that there's a resurgence of like real hard work oriented around the fundamentals. You talked about capitalistic movements. I doubt that that's where it's going to go, but that's my thought on it. So I don't know. I don't know if that even answers your question. I don't know if that's like too roundabout or too abstract.
No, you are entering my wheelhouse, sir. So I'm glad you did so. So let me kind of posit some theories to you, and I'd love to get your take on them. But I agree with you in that I think, like, if you were to take the market share that is now going towards online mediums, whether it's online coaching or it's online programming, and don't get me wrong, online programming, I use online programming.
Sure.
But I've also been training for 20 years. Yeah. So I think there's a little bit of a misallocation there, in that what was originally intended for advanced trainees is now being kind of marketed towards more beginner trainees. Sure. But I would say the most important thing obviously I'm not just blowing smoke here, but I think gyms like Alchemy are going to be a part of the solution, and are already a part of the solution, because you had mentioned marriages that came from your business, trips, friend groups, social gatherings. Those are the things. Like, I really do think that relationships are what are going to power the success and the results of all these people. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, is increase our fitness. And I would compare it to a study they did on talk therapy. And the number one driving factor that determined whether or not someone's going to be successful in talk therapy was their relationship with their therapist.
Interesting.
That was it. And I think to broaden that to fitness, what is actually going to ensure that this person sees the results they're looking for? The relationship with their community in which they practice fitness.
Yeah.
That's kind of my theory. So I would hope that over the next 5 to 10 years, some of that gimmicky stuff, some of that online stuff, this is a fundamentally in-person, rubber meets the road type of business we're all in. Yeah. So I hope we can make gyms, and I believe there's an opportunity for gyms to become this third place that we all are really desirous of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of the challenge is like, I almost feel like, so I just talked about how the fundamentals of training haven't changed, but like the packaging changes every few years. And so what I think is sort of funny, interesting, I don't know. I don't know what the right descriptor is for this, but like, it just feels like new concepts pop up, and they're not really, we're all kind of doing the same thing. And then what the draw is like, you're drawn to the brand, you're drawn to the values of the organization, you're drawn to the coaching staff, like, do your friends train there? And when you think about that, like, and I don't know, and maybe this isn't a bad thing, but it feels like people are choosing their exercise regimen based on things that have very little to do with the exercise. And now you're in an arms race for great social media, and it's like, and again, I'm not putting that on a good, bad scale. It's just an observation, which I bet there are people listening maybe to this who would say like, yeah, I wish I could just like be in the room coaching people, helping people get better, working hard. I wish that could make up 95% of my workday, but actually that makes up 15% of my workday, and all the rest of it, like I'm just kind of swimming against the current of new brands and new positions out in the marketplace. So I don't know. I think what that, let me sort of go full circle. What that has meant for Alchemy over the last few years, as we've observed this, is we've decided that we are going to like double and triple down on who we are as a business. And I think the temptation for, in particular, smaller micro gyms fighting against the larger branding or marketing budgets of franchise concepts is you start going out and you chase them. You start saying, well, what are they doing? Can I do it too? Can I do it like them? And I think now is the time to like really figure out who you are. What are your values as a team, as an organization? Why do you exist? Why do you do what you do? What do you do? What exactly do you do? Who do you do it for? Why do they choose you? I think getting narrower rather than broader, getting more specific rather than like, I'm going to be all these things to all these different people. I think that's where smaller operations have the opportunity to win, because I think there are plenty of people who are probably looking, if you're listening to this, I think, if you figure that out and you say, this is who we are, this is what we do, there are going to be plenty of people who want that. And I don't know, I'm babbling right now. I think it's just, this is a hot topic because we're trying to figure out how Alchemy looks for the next 12 years, right? We're a different business than we were 12 years ago. What are we going to look like in the next 12? And I think it's been something that we've been talking about. How do we double down on who we are?
Hi, let's talk about coaching, but of a different ilk. So you've been a coach, obviously a fitness coach, a trainer, running large group classes in the Alchemy model and the CrossFit model. Did that for quite a long time, but you've also begun coaching business owners and business processes. So number one, how did you discover that was, because you talked about trying a number of different things in your career, obviously scaling a fitness business, trying to be an equipment manufacturer at some point, and you probably realized that sort of maybe nudged you in the direction of what is the thing you really enjoy doing the most. So is that how you ended up on business coaching, or just tell me about that evolution?
Yeah, so I'm an EOS implementer, and EOS stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. It's a complete set of real world simple tools that help business leaders and business owners and leadership teams get more of what they want out of their businesses. At the highest level, the value proposition of EOS is three things that we call vision, traction, and healthy. So as an EOS implementer, I'm working with leadership teams to help them clarify and align around their vision and make sure that they've got a plan in place to really bring that vision to reality. I'm helping them put some tools and disciplines in place so that they're really executing well on that vision, so that they're moving the needle, that the idea of traction, right, that the wheels are turning over, not spinning out in the mud. And we want to help those teams advance their business and advance their team as an open, honest, cohesive leadership team, which is not always the case. In fact, some very successful leadership teams are quite dysfunctional. And so the work I'm doing is oriented around those three things: vision, traction, and healthy. I remember reading Greg Glassman's What is Fitness? I was an athlete. I was an exerciser. I had been training as an athlete my whole life. And I read What is Fitness? And it kind of just like full stop. The light bulb went off. It was hard to poke a hole in that. It just made sense to me. And I realized, I was like, hey, if I'm going to coach people, I like this is what I want to coach them on. This is how I want to coach them. I read a book called Traction, which is basically the book form of EOS, right? So if anybody's interested in learning more, it's written by a guy named Gino Wickman. And I had a similar reaction to it, where having been in a very green entrepreneur in my first CrossFit business, upside down, inside out, hair on fire, always on my heels, reading Traction as we were getting Alchemy off the ground and starting to apply a framework and an operating cadence into my business, the same light bulb went off, and I thought, this is it. I don't need to get any fancier than this because it's a profoundly simple operating system. This is what I need to do. This is what I need to bring into my organization. What I found was that relatively quickly, my hair wasn't on fire anymore, right? I was able to lead and manage my team, and we had clear priorities, and we were tracking clear data, the informative data that was helping me predict things coming down the line. And all of a sudden the temperature kind of came down a little bit. I got a lot of control over the organization. The business started to kind of feel like it was in a bit of a flywheel. And that transition from hair on fire to I'm in some kind of groove and this thing is working, that was very inspiring to me. And in fact, we ended up hiring an EOS implementer at Alchemy, a guy who worked with us for a long time. And watching him do the work that he did with our leadership team and watching him help us with vision, traction, and healthy just kind of like got me going. And I think as we stabilized the business and downsized the business post-pandemic, I was considering whether or not this was still the world for me. And I decided to go all in. And I think that the coaching that I do in the room with leadership teams is not terribly dissimilar from the coaching that you do in the room with people who are members at your gym. You've got an agenda, you've got a finite amount of time, you've got to build trust, you've got to know where to push people, you've got to know where to throttle back and meet them where they're at. You have to be able to sense those things. So the curriculum and the context is different, the material is different, the subject matter is different, but I'm finding that I'm able to tap into a lot of the same skills that I was using in the coaching space. So about 18 months ago, I went all in on that, and now I'm working with teams in all different industries, some in the fitness space, but in a bunch of different industries as well.
In your work with gym owners or people in the fitness space generally, have you found one sort of commonality and maybe like an immediate implementation they can make to make their lives just a little bit easier? Because we certainly know gym owners, the hair on fire is a common issue for those folks. They're wearing a lot of hats. So is there one commonality or something that jumps up above the rest as like this tends to be the highest leverage thing we could do for a gym owner?
For sure. I think process and data tends to be the thing that a lot of smaller gym owners struggle with. And I think that makes sense. There's, gym owners usually they're solopreneurs when they launch the business, and it's tribal knowledge. They know what to do. They understand that they need to take the trash out at the end of the night. They understand that they're going to start class on time and how they're going to structure their formats and when to clean and do, et cetera, et cetera. The moment a part-time coach or a full-time coach joins that team, the moment the business gets a little bit bigger and that person can no longer be everything, they can't wear all the hats 24 hours a day, they have to figure out how to take that tribal knowledge and translate that into a documented and very simplified core process inside the business so that what we say is so that everywhere you look, the most important things are done the same way and the best way every single time. I think that that's a big gap. And then I think that a lot of small business owners are kind of flying a little bit blind in terms of data. They're guessing. They're using intuition and instinct to make big decisions in the organization. Or perhaps if they're a slightly more sophisticated operator, they have a bunch of lagging indicators that tell them how they did last week or how they did last month. And the analogy that I've heard used before is it's like driving your car looking only in the rearview mirror. And we encourage our teams, and I encourage the gym owners that I work with to put some leading indicators into their scorecard. What are the actions that they can measure? How many times did we do this thing that are going to lead to the outcomes that you want? And I think that having teams build out some core processes, having teams build out a scorecard with both lagging and leading indicators has been a big area of opportunity for some of the gym owners that I've worked with.
Yeah, it's funny because I imagine those very same gym owners have no sort of qualms with sitting down and writing out their programming for classes at a 3, 6, 9 month clip, and they're probably uber prepared in that regard. And it's not their fault. It's just that there's not this initial expectation or education around doing the very same thing with their business processes. Yeah. So it's maybe on a Sunday, in addition to writing the program for the upcoming weeks, let's take a look at our business processes and make sure we have that defined clearly as well.
Well, as a matter of fact, I think it's a reasonable time for me to plug something that's going on. So I actually
Absolutely.
have been working alongside Wodify, right? I've been doing some work with Wodify, and we're going to be releasing something here called the Fitness Founder Series. And the Fitness Founder Series is a compilation. It's not 100 things. I think there's 7 pieces to it, where I'm actually going to share some best practices that I've learned the hard way over the last 17 years. Alongside some of this EOS model, we're going to share some of that and offer people some tangible, tactical things that they can do, some downloadable assets, some tools that they can immediately use inside of their business. And for Wodify customers, we're also going to sort of preview ways that they can bring some of this stuff into their business immediately inside the existing platform. Like if you're paying for Wodify, I bet you're using 10 to 20% of the tools and features at your disposal, and you may not even know it. And so hopefully the Fitness Founder Series is going to shed some light on some of the really amazing things that you can do with the platform you're already paying for. So there's my plug. Just look for that in the coming weeks.
I love that, and you're not far off. We actually track the feature adoption, and you're right. It's a very common use case that the majority of the gyms maybe only use certainly less than half of the tools that are made available to them. But it's not shocking that the gyms at the highest end of our revenue stream in terms of who we're working with, they're using 60, 70, 80% of those tools. So even just making small adjustments and, even if it's just trimming another subscription that they weren't aware that they were able to trim because the other tool they're paying for does this thing, it's a real easy value add.
Listen, I'm on this podcast not in my capacity as a partner and somebody who's doing this work with Wodify, but I got to tell you, Alchemy's recently switched to Wodify. And you're 100% right. We're still learning about all the things that we can do. But as we've put things like Wodify sites, workflows into the mix, it's not only made the business better just like because of those tools, it has saved us money because we've been able to cut back on a lot of ancillary software that we've been paying for to do basically the same stuff. And so again, I'm just plugging that purely out of my own sort of positive experience with the company thus far.
Well, Tyler, let's wrap up with a couple of things here. But one thing I really wanted to ask you is you had mentioned, we've been lucky to work with Alchemy on some projects, and you've been working with Wodify and some separate projects with the Founder Series. But now that you've been able to kind of operate inside of a software company a little bit, as a gym owner who's utilized probably a bunch of different software systems throughout your career, you've now been able to see how the sausage is made a little bit.
Yes.
What have you learned about that process? About the technology that is behind the scenes powering these gyms? You've seeing it kind of come to fruition. Like, does anything stand out as maybe different than you would have estimated?
What I would say, what I would point out about my experience in transitioning from our old software to Wodify is I'm actually going to call out the people behind the technology. Mm-hmm. What I have picked up on and been so impressed by is what I am picking up on. I feel it. This real sincere desire to produce really impactful technology for customers. And the way that I have picked up on that is that when we have run into little things that have either not worked the way we wanted them to, or we've had ideas, we've just said, hey, would it be possible for us to we'd love to have prospects show up differently in our rosters when coaches come in so that our part-time coaches know who their prospects are. These are just little things that help us run a better business. The pace at which Wodify has turned that development around has been kind of mind-boggling to us. And so, I guess to some extent, tech is only as good as the people building it, and it's only as good as the motivation and inspiration behind the people building it, and the people who support dummies like me who are trying to figure out how to use it. Because in addition to how good the tech is and how fast the tech evolves at Wodify, I have found that anytime we run into a roadblock, it's just the people are there to help us break through. So I think actually, in summary, what I've been surprised by is how human the technology actually is. I think it's it has not been just a robotic machine somewhere else where my relationship is with a computer and that's it. That's my relationship with Wodify. It actually doesn't feel like that at all. I have a relationship with this really big company full of amazing people working very hard, who are very mission oriented, and that's been something that's been surprising to me.
Yeah, I think at a tech company, even me, because this is the first tech position I've ever had, from the outsider's perspective, and maybe you had this opinion, maybe you didn't, but I certainly did, that I just imagined that there was this high-tech solution to every possible problem. Like onboarding, for example, is probably one of the most difficult things to do in the software space. And, I would have imagined like, oh, they probably have this super nifty thing that exists and just press a button and magically... Right. No, it's a person. It's a person who's going to help you with this process. Like a face a name and they're going to be working with you throughout the process. So while there are some really cool technological feats that we can accomplish, there is just an inherently human part of this as well.
Yeah, shout out to Devin and Megan, who have been, like our spirit guides through this process. Because you're right, 30, 60, 90-day check-ins. Where are you at? What do you need help with? Are there tools that you're struggling with? I mean, it has been a human experience, and as a result, we're getting an awful lot out of the software. So, listeners, take that for whatever it's worth, and you'll make your own decisions.
Very good. Well, Tyler, let's get you out of here on a more philosophical note, shall we? Okay. So, in preparation,
time you got for me? I've been waxing on here. You go philosophical, we could be here for another hour.
That's just fine. But I was listening to a previous interview I'd done in preparation for our conversation today, and you were talking about the early days of your CrossFit gym. Yeah. And essentially living there, right? Like I think you even used the example of showering with like gallon jugs at one point.
That's a true story. Yeah. I lived in my gym and I didn't have a shower, and I would just hide behind the building with jugs of hot water, and that was how I would clean myself at the end of the workday. So yeah, that's a real tale.
Well, so if you could go back and speak to that version of yourself, the guy who's preserving the jugs for the end of the day shower, after all that you've been through, the explosive growth, the decision to be more refined, the foray into coaching, what would you tell that guy?
Well, that's a good question. I would tell that guy to expand his network of mentors, because I was a bit, and maybe I still struggle with this. I'm a bit like closed off. I struggle to benchmark and learn. I always want to just start from scratch and build my own thing, and that's not an efficient way of doing that. And it's probably not the best way of living your life. So expand your network. I had a mentor who used to joke that I was raised by wolves professionally, because I've never really had a more sort of a traditional, conventional job. And I do wish that I could go back and bring more professionalism to the way that I would show up to work. I think that my life and I think my career might have evolved better if I had some of those basic professional skills. And so I think that's maybe the one shortcoming of being like so raw and so green when you get out of college and you just start doing stuff. It was cool, but maybe I lacked some skills. And I would probably, I think maybe something that I would tell myself then and I'd tell myself now is like, try to enjoy the journey, because there are 300 times in the last 17 years I thought my world was caving in as a business. I thought it was all over. I'm done for. Sleepless nights, so stressed out, ruined vacations for me, just so many times. And guess what? My world didn't cave in. I'm still here. I'm happy. Life is really good. And so it's like, it's almost like if you can just see those really challenging, dark stretches of time as a business owner, as just like, you pay to play, it's like part of the game. Maybe it would have made the highs. They still would have been high. Maybe the lows would have been a little less low, and that would have been nice over the last 17 years. That's probably what I would have said.
Well, you're preaching to the choir, man. I need to take your advice, because I am not an entrepreneur. I don't think I have the fundamental characteristics that you probably have, to stress tolerance being one of them. And I am a new Airbnb owner. So I bought a duplex. I live in one side. I rent out the other side. And the amount of stress that this 1 2-bedroom apartment brings into my life, I have had the very same nights where it's like, this is all over. It's done. My world is collapsing because the door lock doesn't work anymore, and they got locked out one time, and they're going to leave me a 3-star review now. So I would say that on a much smaller scale, even I could certainly follow the advice that you would give to that guy as well.
Yeah, just remember, you're going to blink and be 80.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like, that's what I keep trying to tell myself. Like, I'm going to blink and I'm going to be 80. And like, man, just try to enjoy the ride a little bit, I think. But easier said than done. But that's I think it sounds like we're both on the same wavelength there, trying to bring some of that into our lives.
Hell yeah. Well, Tyler, we put up the bat signal today and you delivered, man. So thank you so much for coming on. Tyler Quinn, founder of Alchemy 365. Tyler, I know you did mention a couple projects you work on, but do you have a social media handle or anything you like to direct people to if they want to keep up with your journey?
I'm sad to say I do not. I am completely off all social media. So if you wanna talk to me, Tyler at alchemy365.com. Do the old fashioned way. Yeah, but or you can find my wife. She's on social media, Christy Wright. You can always hunt her down and then send a message through her.
There you go. Well, I also don't have any social media. So if you have any interest in what either of us had to say today, that's too bad because you're not going to be able to find us on the internet. But I'm on LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah. I'm on LinkedIn too. There you go. You can find me there.
There you go. Well, Tyler, thanks so much for joining us, man. This has been a fun conversation. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Cory.
Take care.